Welcome to Mind Shift Power Podcast, a show for teenagers and the adults who work with them, where we have raw and honest conversations. I'm your host, Fatima Bey, the Mind Shifter. And welcome, everyone. Today we have with us Donna Simas. She is in Westchester County of New York. She is a trainer, speaker, and most importantly, psychotherapist specializing in teens and college students. You all know, if you've been listening to me, I am constantly pushing therapy. Well, today we're going to talk about how to tell if you have a good therapist. Because we can say get a good therapist all day and night, but how do you know if you have one? So, and I have the perfect person to talk about that with. How are you doing today, Donna?
Good. Thank you, Fatima. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. So tell everyone, how long have you been a psychotherapist?
About 30 years or more in the field, yes.
Wow. So that's a long time.
I guess so.
Honestly, that's one of the reasons why I have you on here is because you have a perspective that the rest of us can't have. You've seen different generations and you understand this generation as well. And so your perspective is to me very important because I can't have the perspective that you have. So in the 30 plus years that you've been doing psychotherapy, what do you see are the biggest changes that you have seen in our youth?
Right. So that's a question that is very popular now because of the teen mental health crisis that has been identified in our country from the time during COVID. So the good news is that there's much less stigma now and people have a better access to therapy and prevention services and better diagnosis, better medications. All those things are good. But there's still barriers, as we know, because of the cost and other factors that therapists aren't paid enough. They don't have benefits a lot of times. So there's still a lot of people that struggle to find the right therapist at the right time, which especially for young people, they can't always navigate it, especially if they want it to be confidential. So
what do you think? What do you see as the different issues? Let's say a teenager from 1994 to 2024.
Right. So we're lucky we have this guy, Jonathan Haidt. He wrote a book called The Anxious Generation, which explains in depth the negative impact of social media combined with the uptick in sort of overparenting or tiger moms or fears of the outside world that made the parents more cautious. And then the kids went underground. So they had all this, especially girls who spend twice as much time online than boys do. And the girls basically went down the rabbit hole and became more anxious and depressed because they spent more time in their room on their phone. And we could see how that was an sort of obvious change that happened. He says in 2011 was the biggest uptick in that cohort of the depression and anxiety combined with the fear in the world. That group, and that's when they got the iPhones. That's when the iPhones became ubiquitous at the same time. So we know there's a strong correlation there.
So what I'm hearing, the average teenager was just born around then.
Yeah.
So that means that the average teenager doesn't even know a time before all of this.
Right,
they
correct.
Never lived it.
Correct. And this has been brought up a lot. And, we were sort of more like free range kids or whatever. But as my 23-year-old daughter pointed out, she and her friends went to see the moon eclipse thing, the totality thing. And she said
April
it was
of 24. Yeah.
Yeah. And she said it was the first time that her generation came together for something positive because they were born into 9/11 and then there was COVID. And now there's even a million other things going on in the world that are really, really negative for them. So they've had a rough generation.
The reason I'm asking,
Mhm.
talking to the audience now, the reason why I'm asking Donna these questions, I'm constantly talking about how this generation is different than us. And as adults, we need to stop trying to compare ourselves to them because we are not the same. We are growing up on a different planet. They're growing up on a different planet. And Donna, as a psychotherapist, can point out the specific details to that as a professional. And you can hear some of those things. And if you're a teenager listening, I want you to know that there are some adults here who we do actually understand. We get it. And I just think it's important to note that. Now, when it comes to all of that is very relevant to the rest of this conversation. So when it comes to therapists,
Mhm.
all therapists are the same, right? And every therapist is for everyone, right?
Right. You could even do it with a robot or AI. No, just kidding. No, I mean, of course, we all know that the fit is paramount, not
Yeah,
who has the most letters after the name. All of
right.
those things we know. And, that's why I always say at the end of a first session, do you feel comfortable with me? Me personally. It's a personal, trusting relationship. If you don't feel comfortable, there's no space to do this.
There really isn't. I don't want to add because it irritates the crap out of me. You hear me saying it all the time, and it's on my website. I can't stand talking to a clinically trained robot.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And some people are nothing more than that with a title. And I would say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or
Uh-huh.
reword it if you want, Donna. I would say to youth listening, and you are willing to seek out therapy, and you want to find a good therapist. You're not sure what to look for. This episode's for you. If you find that the person you're talking to feels more like a robot than a human,
Mm-hmm.
might be time to say peace out. I want to look for someone else.
Right. And just like anything else, I've heard for years people who spend more time comparing car brands than therapists. Like,
Ooh, good point.
you're entitled to do some research, see where you feel comfortable, and then land in that place. That's your prerogative, and you absolutely should be encouraged to do that. And also,
Uh,
I use the process as my guide. Like, I'm listening, and of course, the Zoom and the phone creates certain barrier to, let's say, intimate conversations, but not after a while you get to know the person, it's totally fine. So the therapist should not be robotic and should not be
mhm.
have a script and should not just do workbook sheets. They should get to know you.
Yes, because it's all about your humanity, not just about a list of things you're supposed to know and concepts you understand.
Right, and empathy. And then also the therapist might not take you, and that's okay too. Like, if
Yes.
someone comes to me and says, I have a 6-year-old boy with ADHD and he's bouncing off the walls, is that for me? No. I
Right.
do young girls, young adult girls, teenagers, 30 something women. That's, I'm not going to be starting to work with, other
Groups of people.
groups of people that I don't know that well. And it's such a relief as an older therapist now to be able to say, you know what, that's not my thing.
And you know what? That is good. A really good therapist does have a specialty, I would say, or a niche.
Yes.
I think it's very important. And if those of you who are listening and looking to get a therapist, don't assume that because a therapist rejects you or says no, they're not going to take you or passes you on to someone else, that there's something wrong with you. 99% of the time is simply because they know that they're not the one for you. So just keep that in mind too. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Sometimes they just know, like if there's certain populations of people I don't deal with. I do not counsel
Yeah.
because I'm not equipped for that, and it's not my focus. And there's nothing wrong with there's
Right.
nothing wrong with
And
that.
some people also come in with, like, a lot of teenagers come in with a diagnosis that they found on TikTok.
Oh
Whatever.
wow!
So they're like, oh, I have anxiety, and you have to be that person, that specialist. But you're more than just that.
Thank
I try to
you.
look at the whole person.
Oh my God! Don't, don't, don't! Please don't get stuck on a freaking title that someone else slapped on you.
Mm-hmm.
They stamped you as XYZ, so that's all you can ever be. That is 100% BS. You can be more. It might be true, but that's not all you are.
Right.
It's
And
just like,
also, like, CBT is a popular therapy, and I rely heavily on
Hmm.
CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. It's a great kind of therapy and it works really well. But I don't stop the therapy and announce, now we're doing CBT. Like I
Yeah.
have enough experience, and your therapist should too, to just seamlessly move through different approaches. And I
Yep.
try to,
Understanding a concept and announcing it are two different things. Right. You
right.
announce
And
it in a
then
class, but not
that's
in.
right. And they sometimes they say, "Oh, well, why aren't we doing CBT?" And I'm like, "Well, actually we are doing CBT because I'm
Yeah.
challenging your thought process."
Yes. And as you should.
Mhm.
Absolutely should. I do that as a coach as well. It's one of the few things we got. That's one of the many things we have a crossover on.
That's right.
Um, Now let's talk, since we're already talking about it. Let's point out just a few pointers of how someone can tell that they have a bad therapist, or at least a therapist that's not a good match for them.
Right. So, there should be some structure, like, in the first few sessions, you have some goals and you are
Yeah.
making some progress towards those
Hmm.
goals. And we have some measurements for that. So it's not just like shooting in the dark.
Hmm.
But you have to check in with your internal space and ask yourself, do I feel better? And you're allowed to compare and contrast and try different approaches.
Yeah.
And it may take some time. Some people like to do therapy just like going to the gym for their whole lives. I do that just to check in. Um, but other people want it for a time limited, and that structure can be discussed. You can ask the therapist, do
Yeah.
you think I'm making progress? I don't feel like I'm making progress. What would you like to work on? What would you like to change? Open up that dialogue.
So is a therapist who just is a yes man and agrees with everything you say an excellent therapist?
No, of course not. Because right, because also kids want feedback. They
Right.
want to relate to they want you to be relatable. So,
Exactly.
uh,
If you have a therapist that just agrees with everything you say, and the therapist is going to ask you how do you feel about such and such, that's a normal question. However, if that's all they do and they just agree with you, you are dealing with a robot.
yeah, exactly. And you want to stay with the process. Like I may have some ideas and agendas in my head, but I'm going to go where you are, and that's what we're taught to do in
Hmm.
school: is meet the client where they are, and then work with the other professionals in their lives, collaborate, see if there's progress. If there's no progress, I'm not going to keep you. I'm going to say, you know what, you may be better served with XYZ.
And that's what a good therapist sounds like.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A bad one will just keep taking your money even though you're not
I know.
progressing.
Right.
And that actually angers me, because
Mm-hmm.
people think that there's something wrong with them because they're not growing, when in fact they just have a therapist that's not interested in growth.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
And any kind of therapy, and there's different kinds of therapy, so
Mm-hmm.
we're just talking about principles right now, because the details are going to vary,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the type of therapist you are
Mm-hmm.
talking about. But I can't stand that. I just can't stand that when people aren't really looking at whether or not you're growing. um and also, Donna, is that what are some of the good things that people
Right.
can look for in a
Right.
therapist?
So some people just need a little extra time to grow up. I really believe that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they don't have to have a diagnosis. It's just a really hard transition growing up. I mean, let's face it. Then other people need more like in depth, like, is it anxiety or depression or both? Or is it just loneliness? A lot of times I find that boredom mimics depression. So I ask them
Oh, good
all
point.
the time about what are their hobbies? What are their interests? Can you take a risk? Can you try something new? You're not going to change if you don't do anything, if you
Yeah,
don't
good point.
do anything.
As humans, we were designed to grow.
Mm,
We were designed for change.
hmm.
So when we go against that design, things are out of order, they're out of balance, and they don't work.
Right,
And
right,
then we end up with issues. So now,
right.
is therapy only for people that are retarded and crazy?
Absolutely not. I mean, some kids say, like, oh, I feel bad. I don't have a big enough problem. It's okay. You have a little anxiety. It's very workable.
Mm-hmm.
You're not dying, but that's okay. It's fine. It's like sort of like going to the gym. You can just work through something small and specific or something big and, God forbid, traumatizing. But anyone can look into themselves without any shame or fear in theory.
I said it that way, and some people find those words offensive, and I know that they are. However, they're the real words that some people use
Mm-hmm.
to describe themselves or others. I've heard it, so that's why I'm just being real with that.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think people don't recognize that it's actually healthier
Mm-hmm.
to talk to a therapist, even if you only talk to them once a month.
Yeah,
Just
and I used
to
to when
balance your brain.
when I was doing in person, occasionally like one young client would see another leaving, which of course is not ideal, but they would be so happy because they would be like, oh, there's other kids like me that do
I'm
this.
not the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah. There has been a stigma, and I think it's still there. And I think we are in the process of getting out of that stigma. But,
Mm-hmm.
For generations, it's been a stigma. Oh, if you see a therapist, there must be something wrong with you. You must be crazy. And that's not true. In fact, the craziest ones are the ones who don't go to see the therapist because they
Right.
haven't worked out the
Right.
issue.
And so many of my young clients have gone on to lead beautiful, productive lives, and they keep in touch with me. And it's such a good feeling to know that you help them over the biggest hurdle of maturation. That doesn't mean that we pathologize everything about you.
Yes. Let me ask you this, Donna, because it's something that I believe is too prevalent. But if I'm wrong, correct me.
Mm-hmm.
I think way too often people are diagnosed with depression because they have a depressive moment,
Huh.
which to
Yeah.
me is not the same thing as being depressed. Because
Right.
this just like stopping at a gas station doesn't make you a car. You might be driving a car. You stop there to get gas, but you're not living at the gas station.
Yeah, you're so right. But when you're a teenager, everything's exaggerated, so you don't
True,
know
true.
you don't know what you don't know. And that's one of my favorite expressions. You can't blame yourself for what you didn't know before you knew it.
True. Very true.
So,
Very, very
yes,
true.
the longer you live, the more perspective you have, and it's really hard for teenagers to have that perspective.
Yep. Unless they've been through a lot. Because there
Mm-hmm.
are, and this too, there are some teenagers that have been through more than most of us adults.
Right.
And they have a level of experience and maturity that some 40-year-olds don't have. I
Right.
have seen that too.
Yes, indeed. And that word resilience is really powerful in
Yeah.
my work because some people are just born with a little, I like to focus on people's strengths, and they have a better disposition to get through adversity. They may have been born that way, and some people just get knocked down by it. It's really interesting where they draw the resilience from in their lives.
Yes. And some of them are quite impressive. I'm
Definitely.
always
Well,
impressed by people who still stand strong and do what they need to do, regardless of all of the the bats that have been swung at their head, so to speak,
right. Well,
the
that
boulders that
happened
life
to
has served
me
them.
personally. I mean, that's why I do this. I mean, I love working with kids because they're like alive and awake and they can make the changes quickly.
Yeah, that's true.
But in my life, I went through so many different ups and downs, and it just took forever to get to that place where I felt more myself
Mm.
and capable.
For me, I had low self-esteem all my life, like
Me too.
really
Yeah.
rejection issues,
Mm-hmm.
low self-esteem,
Mm-hmm.
very, very bad.
Yeah.
Condemnation where nobody could beat me up more than I did.
Same.
And I was smiling and
Mm-hmm.
leading other people and strong and all that, but they didn't know that internally, I had all that going on. It took me a long time to get to the point of having confidence. I wouldn't have done this years ago.
Me too. It literally took me decades to feel a little bit empowered in myself again.
Something I've come to learn,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not as bad as I thought I was.
Same.
And
Same.
there's many of you out there listening that need to learn that about yourself too.
Yeah, sometimes you could look at your resume, and I do, and say like, who did all that? That that
Me
wasn't
too.
me, was it?
Sometimes I look back at things that I wrote and I'm like, I said that?
Saying, right. Or people or clients will say to me, like, you said something so amazing and profound to me. It changed my life. I'm like, I did?
Yes. And as we grow, we learn more about ourselves. And when having a therapist to talk to can help you sort out those thoughts and come to that realization. So there doesn't have to be something wrong with you for you to go see the therapist.
Exactly.
Sometimes they're just there to enhance you. Simply, for some people, that's it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with you.
Right.
See a therapist anyway, because they can help you balance out your thoughts. If you keep all your thoughts in your head and they never come out, you never get a chance to sort them out. It's like puzzle pieces in a bag. We can't see the whole picture because they're in a bag. So sometimes we need to get them
also
out
when
there.
you're tamping yourself down and people pleasing your whole life, you get more anxious because it's stuck in your body. And that was the other big breakthrough in the last 30 years, is that trauma lives in the body.
It does. It really does.
And that's the big takeaway from Bessel van der Kolk, who I admire very much. He wrote that book called The Body Keeps the Score, which was the top of the bestseller list during the pandemic for no apparent reason, because it's like this little esoteric book on childhood trauma. But everyone felt traumatized, so they picked up the book.
Yeah. Yeah, they did.
And now we understand you got to combine the mind-body interventions and let the client decide what they need to do to get unstuck. It's not a top-down thing. You have to buy into it. You can't be doing more work than the client.
Yes, that is 1,000% true. We cannot, as a coach, I do this too. I will lead you to the water, but you're going to drink.
Right.
I am not doing it for you. Right. You know, if you want to run the race, I will encourage you on the side and I'll be your coach. I am not running for you. I am not, I'm not pulling you in a wagon either. That doesn't help. That doesn't help
even for example, I did this amazing thing. I was preparing for a family meeting with one of my clients this morning, and I was making notes and everything else, and they didn't show up. I'm like, that's not my fault.
No,
you got to show up. You got to meet me halfway. You can't.
You can only grow if you want to, and we can't make anybody grow, unfortunately. I know as a coach, if I decide whether or not I'm going to, just like a therapist, whether or not I'm going to accept a client, and there's some people I reject. For that very reason, I can see that they're not ready to actually put the work in. They don't need to be perfect. I'll meet people where they are. I have no problem with that. What I need to see is a willingness to grow, a willingness to change so that you can grow, a willingness to be open to change, and change isn't easy for everybody. I get that. And you might have to go at your own pace, but that willingness is what I look for. And if I don't see it, we're done. Because I can't, nobody can help you.
It has to do with motivation. One of my clients likes to, at the end of the session, wrap up with like a little phrase, like, what's my phrase for the week? And we come up with it together. Like, this week, I'm going to let things roll off of me. Or this
I like that.
week, I'm going to wake up earlier. Or this week, I'm going to not focus on what everyone else thinks about me. And then you pick up it becomes more habitual if you put the focus there.
Yep. Little focuses at a time is how we build anything. I want to go back to something you talked about a minute ago, and just to clarify, because I think it's important to clarify this point, because too many people think in extremities and don't realize they're making a mistake. There is a difference between, can you explain the difference between a therapist that challenges you versus the client who doesn't want to be challenged? So if a therapist is challenging you, does that automatically mean that they're just a mean jerk?
Oh gosh, no. But it's a constant feedback loop, right? You have to hear and then reflect. And like one patient actually told me, like, I actually want you to challenge me more, because I tend to be a little bit laid back. So I said, okay, no problem. And I tried it a little bit with her, and she responded much better. So everybody's different.
Yes. And also everybody's growth rate is different. So it might take me 6 days to do something that might take you 6 months. We are not the same, and that's okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
please don't compare yourself to everybody else's growth scale. You're not them.
Exactly.
You are you.
Uh-huh.
And we understand that.
Right.
And we're willing to work with that. We understand that everybody works on the same timeline. So you need to understand that about yourself. I see people that get impatient with themselves because they feel like, well, I went to a therapist and there's just, I'm still messed up and it's been 6 months.
Right. Right. Exactly. I mean, in body work, you will do like I wrote down the word consolidation, like in my yoga class. After you do a pose and hold a pose, you give it a minute for it to consolidate inside of you. And that's the same what I think of therapy. Like it might feel like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. That's very common.
Mm-hmm.
And you're giving yourself a little time to consolidate what you've learned. That's all.
I completely agree. Now, Donna, tell us, what else do you do? Tell us about the project you have going on right now.
Yeah, so I started a new project, which is sharing my 30 years of experience working with teens and young adults in therapy with a course that is on my website available to purchase. It's donnasimas.com/course. And the course is called Attunement and Connection to Teens and Young Adults in Therapy. And it's for other therapists to learn how to better their work with teenagers from the point of view of a style and a unique approach that I have to be more relatable with them.
Yes. So therapists, listen up.
Yeah,
I think this is
therapists, listen up.
great.
You can, I mean, you can, in other words, learn from an experienced professional, something that you might not know starting out.
Yes. I think it's important that we listen to different voices so that we can gain balanced thinking.
Yeah.
That's one thing I love that this podcast has done for me. I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
Since I started just talking to different guests. I learned about things I didn't know and understand before.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that makes me a more balanced person.
Right. And it's so liberating at this stage of my life to say, you know what, I don't know, but I will ask and I will research and I will get back to you.
And that, again, is some more balanced and mature thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The immature, the imbalanced would go, I'm going to make up something right now because I need my ego to pretend like I know everything.
That's it. Right. And you don't want a narcissistic therapist or an ego-driven
Oh,
therapist.
yes. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yes.
Oh, my God.
Because
how can we tell?
You can tell. Well, because the person will basically talk about themselves the whole time, which is totally inappropriate.
That's probably the biggest one. Yeah.
Yeah. And what I do is I do share a lot with my clients. I get to know them. It feels like almost like a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
But I will only share when I think it's prudent and appropriate. Like, oh my God, that happened to your dog. That happened to my dog too. Oh my God.
Right. Relatable. That's
again,
important.
like normalizing their experiences by saying other people have those experiences too. And so do I. I am not above you. You can trust me because I'm not trying to put myself above you and be a know-it-all. But if you're just going on and on about your own problems for the whole time, that's not productive. Get your own therapist.
All right. Well, Donna, how can they find you? Tell them your website.
Again, donnasimas.com or donnasimas.com/course. Buy the course and learn from experience.
Well, Donna, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation and even more the conversations we've had off air.
You too, Fatima. You are so cool. And also, I want to add, I do like to use humor in all my work. It's so powerful. It just is so powerful to just put people at ease.
It is. I use humor a lot. I mean, people here, I have a crazy personality anyway. I don't hide it. But but it does help. It puts people at ease. You're absolutely right. It does help. It's not always appropriate at all times. Again, you want to be balanced there too. Right. But it can help. It can help people feel even more relatable.
Silences too. Just you can let it be. You can let there be space for silence. And that's another big part of therapy.
A lot of things happen in silence.
Yes. Indeed.
because we let it happen. We leave
Yeah.
it be. Good and bad, but we're talking about the good right now.
But you learn to co-regulate with the therapist. Okay, we're going to take it down a notch, and that's fine. Let's just breathe and be present.
Good point. Good point. Well, once again, Donna, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
coming
Thank
on
you.
today.
I'm so happy that we did this.
And now for a mind-shifting moment. Here's something I want you to think about. When it comes to therapy, today we talked about what's a good therapist, what's a bad therapist. But regardless of what kind of therapy you're talking about or who the therapist is, 50% of good therapy is you. Are you meeting the therapist? Are you being honest? Are you being real about what happened? They can't help you if you lie to them. And the truth is, that's an issue. And when you do have a good therapist and you feel like the therapy is working really well, the same thing applies. 50% of that is you. Thank you for listening to Mindshift Power Podcast. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at The Mindshifter. If you have any comments, topic suggestions, or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit fatimabay.com/podcast. Remember, there's power in shifting your thinking. Tune in for next week.